Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're just allowing individuals to come into the webinar and join us. We're super excited to have everyone today. Give us just one more second to let those numbers add up and we will get started. All right, it looks like our calendar is starting to slow down a little bit. Michelle, why don't we get going? Hello, I am Spence Wixom. I'm the president and CEO of the Brooks Group and greatly appreciate this opportunity to get with all of you today and share with you some of our newest research. The person I'm most excited to introduce today, who is going to be the host and leader of this webinar, is Michelle Richardson. She's the VP of Sales Research here at the Brooks Group and the leader of our Sales Performance Research Center. We have a great study here that a lot of people have spent a lot of time and effort putting together that we feel is going to be incredibly valuable to B2B sales organizations in 2024 who are looking to make strategic decisions and make their people as productive and as effective as possible in front of customers. But enough of an introduction for me. I want to turn it over to Michelle to tell us a little bit about this exciting research study that we've conducted. So take it over, Michelle.
Thank you, Spence, and I really appreciate that introduction. I am so excited to share this research. We have worked collaboratively on this over the last several months, and I know that you all will find some really impactful information. I want to welcome everyone that's here. I would also encourage everyone to please let us know who you are and where you are joining us from. Feel free to comment in the chat. We want to make this as interactive as possible. When you do put your information in the chat, or if you want to add a comment, please make sure you're sharing with everyone and not just host and panelists, so everyone can see the comments. And yeah, let's get started and talk about why we felt like it was important to do this research. Why this research? And there's really three main reasons. Number one, I think it's safe to say, and everyone would agree, that we are in a changing sales environment, right? The economy has been somewhat uncertain over the last year or two, and even seems that way heading into 2024, right? We were in an economic boom, particularly kind of pre-COVID. Most sellers are facing tighter budgets with their buyers. So we really felt like this was a good time to address this research. We also know there's changes to both buyers and sellers. In the book that we released a couple of years ago, Agile and Resilient, we talked about changing buyer expectations and availability. It is hard to get a hold of buyers nowadays, right? They're not answering your emails. They're not answering the phone. They're being much more selective in who they talk to. Their expectations for the buying process are different, right? They are expecting that whole B2C experience that they have in their personal lives, in their business lives. They want transparency. They want digital. They want instant responses. And there are more people involved in that buying process, right, to mitigate risk. But that often means that they can't agree on a way to go. And so rather than make a bad decision, they may default to status quo. So that whole buying process has changed. We also know that sellers have changed. And Spence, you and I have talked about this in previous webinars. The demographics are changing. We have a generation of sellers that are retiring and a generation of new sellers entering into the industry. And those individuals may be wired differently. We've done a lot of research around how sellers are motivated now. Maybe they're more collaborative. They want to be more work-life balanced focused. Their mindset is different. So that's impacting how your teams should be performing in the marketplace. So from a leadership and coaching perspective, different tactics and approaches may be in order, from your hiring to your training to your coaching. And the profile of sales success may be different now than it was, say, 5 years ago. So a lot of, I think, essentially change happening. And we wanted to bring our audience the tools to navigate that more successfully.
That's a great introduction, Michelle, and no shortage of things for people to consider going into 2024, right?
Exactly.
From
Yeah,
economy
exactly.
to mindset to different buyer behavior. There's a host of complexities out there, and also what's interesting that I just will highlight, and I don't mean to steal your thunder at all in the research, but I think one of the things that was most interesting to me is with all of this host of factors that you just listed, not every business is feeling them the same way, right? When we went out and asked
Right.
people just specifically about the economic environment and whether that's beneficial to you or not beneficial to you and your business, there were strong pluralities answering both of those.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, what we share, what we talk about here affects different people in different industries and different situations differently. And what our hope is to start this conversation and really dig into this so you can think about how it applies specifically to you. Super excited to all the people who said hello on the chat. So many old friends and associates and people who are part of the community. So thank you so much for joining, and let's have a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for mentioning that point, Spence, about how the current conditions are affecting industries and organizations differently. It's a very unique situation, I think, that that organizations are in right now. All right, let's really briefly kind of just talk about the research as a whole, just to give everyone a sense of the respondents. So we issued a survey, though we had 155 North American B2B sales leaders respond, and these titles represented everything from CEO, general manager, president, to chief revenue officer, CSO. We had sales VPs, sales enablement leaders, directors, et cetera. So really everything at that sales leadership level and above. It represents 16 plus industries. So we have a good distribution of industries. It is the research is not skewed or weighted towards one or the other. And there's no more than 8% of responses coming from any one industry. So again, evenly distributed. So as you look at the research, which you will get a copy of at the end of the webinar, you will see that it is representative across a wide range. And organizations with more than $50 million in revenue annually. All right, Spence, we're going to kick it off with a poll.
Let's do this. If we haven't gathered enough data already, let's gather a little bit more
that's
here.
Right. That's right. That's right. What is your top priority for 2024? And we've got these options here, and want to kind of see what the group is leaning towards. And by the way, if you are choosing other, if you feel comfortable doing so, if you'd like to just put in the chat what that other priority might be. All right. Kind of interesting, Spence, how this is playing out.
It is, and I'm excited to talk about it. Once we're almost there. It looks like we've almost got a pretty consensus view here among the people who are on the call. Thank you to those who have been putting some chat comments in there. You can see it's mostly new business, new customers, new territories. And we're going to talk about that because I think that's interesting that is almost to the person, the common theme of those who aren't identifying one of the three that we have listed here.
Yep. All right.
Okay, looks like we've got about a full view here of what's going on.
Yes. All right, so 63%, it looks like the winner is expand existing accounts, and followed by strengthen margins and profitability. Other kind of took that third place, and retain existing customers came in last. So interesting kind of distribution there. And of course, there was a reason that we asked this specific question. And that is because this was a question that we asked on our research. And Spence, I think you were right. when you said anybody that entered other mostly was new logo.
Yep. Almost, yeah, probably almost exclusively. So this is interesting because our ordering here is different from what was answered, right? It almost number one and number three were switched. But Michelle, tell us a little bit about that, what we saw in the study. And then we've got a few ideas, everyone, as to the themes, the situations driving this. And we wanted to share those with you quickly.
Yes. So one of the questions that we asked on our survey was, what are your sales organization's most important strategic objectives going into 2024? And we asked them to select 3. And we gave them a longer list than what you see here, but these are the top 3. So increase customer retention came in number 1. 65% of our respondents marked this as a strategic priority for 2024. Strengthen margins and profitability. That came in second at 56%, and grow or expand existing accounts came in third at 41%. And those were a pretty clear top 3 responses in terms of the priorities. But what I think is really interesting, Spence, and you and I have had these conversations, is what's not on this top list, right? Everyone is focused on increasing, retaining the customers they have, strengthening and shoring up their financials, and expanding their existing accounts. What's not on here, which we saw in our chat, is things like winning new logos, which was something of a surprise, I think, for us.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting is these top 3 priorities are a reflection of the environment that we're in. I think organizations are looking around and saying, I need to make sure I have a protected base of business that I can count on, that I can forecast against, that I can operate my business around. And that's why it's important for us to retain those existing customers. And I think it's a lot of organizations are learning that customer retention is a unique skill set, and that they need to be identifying and training and developing people to manage that, which is a continuous flow of relationship development, account management, customer improvement, substantiation, meaning you've identified the benefits, the return that what your solution has done for the customer, and you're sharing that data and you're having that consultative conversation in a continuous way with your customer, right? What we need to be very careful against, and I think a lot of organizations are recognizing this, is the fire drill, all hands on deck to save the renewal of the customer at the last minute, right? We need to be much more conscious of maintaining those relationships throughout their term and put people with the skill set to do that in place. Strengthen margins and profitability. Margins and profitability go together. They're not necessarily the same thing. I think a lot of organizations are recognizing we need to be selling solutions at an effective margin to continue to fund our growth in our business. And the profitability comes from that as well. And not only is it, signing deals with a good margin calculated into them, but it's also how do we convert that into good operating cash flow through our invoicing, through our collections, making sure that we're getting that cash into our business to be able to invest in growth opportunities and in expanding our operations. Because as we all know, capital coming from equity investment or debt investment is harder to come by today. So we need to more and more think about how we fund growth through operational cash flow, which starts with good margin and a profitable structure. Expanding existing accounts, different in kind than retaining existing accounts. What I like to say is your retaining of existing accounts is farming in the who is the author that I'm trying to think of here? John Steinbeck's Salinas Valley, right? Like that black, soft earth that you can cultivate. Expanding existing accounts oftentimes involves trailblazing. It involves homesteading, clearing the brush, getting all the rocks out of the field so that you can farm it. And there's a skill set associated with that that's very similar to new business acquisition. It's building relationships with new stakeholders. It's taking, in partnership with stakeholders who value you and will advocate on your behalf, and going to new geographies or new divisions of these customer business and opening them up. So I do think you want to think differently about the skill set for retaining existing customers and expanding existing customers.
I completely agree. And I know, in fact, we've worked with customers on defining what does a good rep that cross-sells, that upsells, that really deepens those account relationships and expands those account relationships. What does that look like in comparison, say, to someone that is just hunting for new logos? So something to kind of think about for our audience in terms of, what your priorities are. What does that mean for the skill set and the requirements for your team? Does that change? What should you be looking for? The other thing, just to kind of mention with regard to these priorities, that next tier of responses, which is not shown here on the screen, hovering right around the 1/3 mark, were things like increase average deal size, expand into new markets, improve win rates, and win new accounts. So that was our next tier, kind of second tier of answers. And Spence, again, you and I have talked about really this kind of relates to, in many ways, sales velocity. So making that engine more efficient, making sure that the deals you get in, that are coming in the door, are you increasing that value? Are you winning more? Is your conversion rates better? And are you acquiring those new logos? Are they qualified opportunities?
Yeah, what I thought was interesting about that is it's kind of an even split which of those variables organizations are tackling once they kind of go below this priority set. Some are going after like average deal size increase. Some are going after trying to improve win rates. Some are trying to just go after getting more lead volume or opportunity volume into the business. The one that was different that I thought was interesting at the very bottom of our list, and you'll see this when you look through the report, is shortening sales cycles, which I think with the complexity of customer buying today, I think a lot of organizations are just basically saying, you know what, the cycle time is what the cycle time is. And if we can improve it marginally a little bit there, great. But the more important thing for us in our business is to have more of those opportunities in play. And regardless of the time it takes us, really try to get a better win rate on them and make them bigger. And sometimes when you're trying to make them bigger, you're going to push out that cycle time. So we just thought that was an interesting way of thinking about prioritizing those variables and getting better sales velocity.
Yes, exactly. All right. So let's talk about the findings that we're going to be sharing with you today. We're going to share 3 key areas, and also with the caveat that there is much more in our trend report, in the research that we're going to be sharing with you. These are 3 areas that we thought were especially important that we could cover in the time today. We're going to look at sales process adherence and the importance of that. We're going to talk about selling skills and specifically questioning and quantifying value. And we're going to talk about hiring and onboarding practices. Now, as you look at our research paper after the webinar today, and as we talk about these results, you're going to hear us talk about successful sales teams versus underperforming sales teams. So we want to give you kind of a definition of what we are talking about when we talk about that. So successful sales teams met or exceeded their previous year's revenue goals. So we asked specifically how these respondents, how their teams finished their previous year in terms of meeting their revenue goals. So successful teams met or exceeded those goals. Underperforming teams missed their previous year's revenue goals. So that's what the distinction is. And as we talk about these, kind of have that as your frame of reference. All right, time for another poll. And we want to know, how consistently do most of your sellers follow your sales process? And if you don't have a sales process, select rarely.
It would stand to reason.
Right. If you don't have a process, you are not following it. Your team is not following it. I'm really curious on these results.
Yeah.
I think, and clearly we have some research around consistency of following the sales process that we're going to share. And it was really interesting. I think one of the more interesting kind of surprising findings, Spence, from our research.
I would agree with that.
All right. It's looking like so far we've got a winner, a clear front runner. Let's just put it that way. All right.
So most of the time it is.
Yes, it is. More than just over half follow the sales process most of the time, followed by occasionally and rarely, and kind of a small number for all the time.
Now, I'm wondering if a lot of people saw all the time as like perfection, which is 60% of the time it works every time.
Yeah, good point.
So
Good point.
that is probably the most surprising thing to me is how small our all the time group is. Now, again, everybody may have read that as absolute perfection, in which case most of the time probably has a wide band of answers from maybe half the time to almost all of the time.
Right.
But
right.
either way, I think what we're seeing is a large portion of this population hanging out somewhere in the middle. It's a thing we have, it's a thing we want to do, we aspire to do. We just do it kind of as much as we can. So, Michelle, let's talk about what we found in our study as it relates to process.
All right. So what we found is that 95% of successful teams closely adhere to their sales process. And by that, we mean that always or most of the time. Only 69% of underperforming teams do so. So again, reminding the group of successful teams met or exceeded their revenue goals, underperforming teams missed their revenue goals. And we did ask first, do you have a sales process? 95% of the audience said yes. And then we asked them how closely do their teams adhere to that sales process. So I think for us, this was kind of the big aha, is that adherence, we talk a lot about the importance of sales process, but it really is the adherence to that process. It's not enough to have the process. You need, and your team needs, to adhere to that process as consistently as possible. Maybe perfection and all the time is a lofty goal, but aim for that consistency because it does pay off in terms of revenue goal attainment.
Yeah, Shannon put a comment in the chat, as everybody has probably seen. It's not just following a process, it's how well they are performing each step of the process. Couldn't agree more,
yes.
Shannon. And we're actually going to go more deeply into that because there are layers to this, right? It's having a sales process, adhering to that sales process in a consistent way in your organization, pushing for more of that consistency and conformity in the process adherence, particularly to its principles. And then how do we improve the quality of the interactions and the activity that's in that process? So you can kind of think about those as layers. One of the things that I found very interesting in this research, Michelle, is the endpoints, kind of the extremes that we were seeing, right? So a statistic we didn't include on this page that I think is really interesting is that 83% of teams that rarely follow the sales process were behind their goal last year. So you see the teams that are closely adhering, really pushing for that adherence and that consistency in their organization have a strong correlation to hitting and exceeding target, where you have a sales process, it's been articulated as most organizations do, but there's little discipline in getting people and coaching and getting people to adhere to that process, really follow those principles. Those organizations really struggle. So there's this big kind of mushy middle of organizations that we hope are pushing towards that greater adherence, incorporating it into their tools, into their practices, and into their coaching to drive that performance better. And I guess the underlying point that we're trying to make here is, if you're looking for ways to improve the organization, to improve the performance of the organization, think about and evaluate the consistency and the your adherence to a sales process. I mean, a few years ago, many organizations, because time was so good and money was so plenty and customers were showing up ready to buy, weren't really concerned about the discipline and the activity of what they were doing to close that business. And I think that trend is definitely changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry just put it in the chat, coaching is critical to driving adherence to process. 100% completely agree with that. We're actually going to have some more data on the importance of coaching as a little bit later, because that was another key finding for us. I would also encourage organizations, as you are looking to drive that consistency, look at how you can drive that behavior. Coaching is one way. CRM integration is another. So we found that 62% of successful teams integrate the sales process into their CRM, and 40% of underperforming teams do. And 89% of teams that have integrated their sales process into their CRM follow that process all or most of the time. So those types of things. So if you've got coaches that are consistently speaking about the sales process and reinforcing that sales process, and it's built into your business processes like CRM, you're going to drive more of that consistency. The other thing that we found, as you can see here on the screen, successful teams are more competent across all stages in the sales process compared to underperforming teams.
I think this goes back to what Shannon said earlier, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's not just having one, it's adhering to one. And then as you adhere to it, you get better at it. We get better at what we practice and we do consistently.
Exactly. All right, so let's dig into those stages of the sales process. When we talk about teams being more competent across those stages, what does that look like? And as you can see here, we are showing you kind of a visual of a sales process. It happens to be Impact, which is the sales process that we teach here at the Brooks Group, and 6 steps. And we're going to talk through the results that we found by stage, but wanted you to kind of have context and a visual as we did so. So we did ask our respondents, at what stages in the sales process do your sellers most frequently struggle? And when we look at, you can see the investigate step here. This is where we talk about prospecting, pre-call planning. So 60% of, for successful teams, 60% were effective. They were competent and capable in this investigate step, in prospecting and pre-call planning. Conversely, the underperforming teams, more than half, so 55% of those teams struggled at least half the time in that stage. So think about, if you are struggling to get good qualified opportunities in at the beginning of the sales process, that's going to affect your success throughout the rest of the process.
Yeah, this is one of the big difference makers, is having the capability, the time, the focus, understanding what to do effectively at this investigate stage is what we've seen. Successful companies understand that much better. Those companies that are missing target have probably underinvested or underfocused in getting this particular area of their process right. Yeah.
So then as we look at engaging customers and building relationships. So on this diagram, we're talking about that meet step where you build trust, you create that positive impression, you get the sales call started out on the right foot. Our successful teams, 66% of our successful teams were effective, competent, capable in this stage of the process. Our underperforming teams, 56% struggle at least half the time. So more than half of teams that are underperforming struggle in being able to engage and build relationships. Looking at questioning and discovery, discovery. So that would be the probe step here on the screen. 51% of our successful teams were effective here. Underperforming teams, 59% struggled at least half the time. So, looking at just those first 3 stages of the sales process, we would advocate that 70% of the sales process right there. And so your successful teams are more competent, more effective in these stages, and the underperforming teams are struggling more, right? So if you can get those qualified opportunities in, if you can engage customers appropriately and effectively, and if you can ask good questions, really understand what it is they're trying to accomplish, then that sets you up for the back half of the process.
Yeah, and Michelle, not to give away punchlines here, but to hint at them going forward, based on those statistics that Michelle shared, it's that probe area where, yes, your more successful teams are doing better and your less successful teams are struggling in that area, but it is improvement for most organizations. I think that is a place, if you want to make a bet on improving overall capability, competency, strength in following the process, that's one to pay attention to.
Yes, you're completely correct there. We'll share the data for the other 3 steps, but spoiler alert, successful teams are better than underperforming teams, but they're still lowest in that probe step. I think that is a skill, and we see this with our clients across the board, as that is the step in the sales process where most teams can use the most improvement and development. When we talk about presenting proposals and price, quoting price, that's the apply step, right? We're building our recommendation and our solution. Successful teams, 76% of our successful teams are effective, competent in this apply stage. And 46% of underperforming teams struggle at least half the time. So again, being able to build value for that recommendation, present an effective proposal.
Here's the interesting thing. Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. No.
Here's the interesting thing about the apply step for me, and I think it's different than the probe step. So where we said on the probe step, this is a broad development area across good organizations, across struggling organizations. We think everybody should be focusing and looking for development areas here. Apply is different in that I think there's a lot of organizations who are like, we do this pretty well. And you know what? The statistics would play out that you do it pretty well, but you're doing it good. And then there's some organizations who are doing it great. And it's going from that good to that great that can make a difference. And I think what you have to think about there is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, really, how well are we presenting that value? How well are we having conversation that gets to the real deep connection to what the business is trying to achieve, as opposed to just kind of a surface value conversation. So there's opportunity here, even though most organizations probably feel somewhat confident about what they're doing in that particular area.
Yeah, I would agree, Spencer. That's a great point. And again, my experience, I see organizations putting a lot of emphasis on how to present a proposal and quoting price and that part of the sales process. When it comes to managing objections and negotiating terms, and we would refer to the convince step here, successful teams, so 54% of successful teams are effective here. 60% of underperforming teams struggle at least half the time here. And I think, again, that's pretty common. We hear a lot about managing objections as a challenge from our customers negotiating. I would also say that the better you do in those early stages, right, especially the probe stage, if you understand and can surface, or your team can understand and can surface what the customer perceives as value, really understand that, the better job you are going to have at minimizing those objections in the first place. And your negotiations are going to go much smoother. So the better job you do on that front end, the smoother it goes on that back end of the sale. And then for closing skills, so tie it up step, right? Asking for the business. 61% of successful teams are effective here, and 62% of our underperforming teams struggle at least half the time in this stage of the sales process. So again, the biggest room for growth, I think, is that probe step. And if you can improve in that step, it should spill over to improvement in those later stages as well.
What I think is interesting about this tie it up stage is it's really where a difference between high performing organizations and struggling organizations comes into play. And I think a lot of that is a change in customer behavior in recent years, that uncertainty in making decisions because of a lot of the things that Michelle shared earlier. It's a lot of organization business was just getting done in a much more natural way with abundant economic resources a few years ago. People are a lot more cautious about making investments. They get very gun shy because that's precious operating cash flow that they are targeting or investing in things they're trusting will make their business better. And helping them through building that certainty in their mind to take that action is a new skill. And the organizations who have people who have that skill, who can execute those late stage conversations and get those deals across the line, are succeeding. Organizations who don't have that, who need to develop that, are struggling.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And you hit on the key word here, which is skills. So we've talked about sales process, right? The stages of the process. Within each of these stages are skills. And so we want to drill down and share some data. And Spence, you kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago. We're going to share some data around 2 skill areas. And that is...
Michelle, before you jump into that, can I just
Yes.
answer Daniel's question really
Oh,
quickly?
yes.
It came through. Daniel, we can do one better for you. I hold in my hand the actual report of which Michelle is quoting. All of the statistics and data that we're talking about here are all included in the report. We're going to give everybody on the webinar here the link to download it. This is kind of the launch webinar for this report. So you'll have all of that information at your fingertips to use.
Appreciate that comment, Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're welcome. And you're welcome. All right, so skills. So our next key finding is going to be on the selling skills of successful teams. And to get to this data, we asked our respondents how their teams best conduct for questioning. How do they best conduct customer discovery and questioning during a sales call? And we gave them 4 response options, 4 ways or 4 strategies for questioning in a customer conversation. And they were ranked from most effective, right? We gave them the most effective strategy, second most, third most, fourth most, or least effective option. And so our successful teams, more of our successful teams, chose those top questioning strategies, and I will share with you what those are, versus 33% of our underperforming teams. So our successful teams, those that are meeting and exceeding quota, are using more effective questioning strategies than the underperforming teams. And those strategies are, they seek to identify what the customer needs to buy and the process for making a buying decision. That was our second most effective. Or they seek to not only understand what the customer needs to buy, but those underlying wants, what they want to accomplish in their business. So those were the 2 most effective responses, and 54% of our teams chose that. The underperforming, or the least effective strategies, were they ask introductory questions and then pitch our offering. or they focus on product-based questions to identify which products or service to include in a proposal or quote. So again, our successful teams better at using those top questioning strategies. There is a caveat though, and that is that we still have a large percentage, a significant percentage of both groups, right, successful and underperforming, that are focusing on those product-based questions. So 32% of successful teams and 44% of underperformers are still relying on product-based questions, right? So that is the one of the lesser effective strategies, which means that both groups are leaving probably additional opportunities on the table. They're missing key points, key priorities that the customer is looking to have addressed.
Yeah, and this goes to a question that Cecilia asked just a bit ago. What are some top questioning strategies? And that's what we outline in the report. We really see a difference in the type of question, the depth of questioning that these successful teams are doing versus these unsuccessful teams. They're asking questions, they're exploring very different things. The successful teams exploring what that business is trying to accomplish, what its goals are, what its expectations are, what its strategy is. The less successful teams, just some superficial questions to just try to find that surface need that they can target a solution at, or just focused around the product, the features and benefits questioning. So different in kind questioning strategies. One of the things that I think is interesting about questioning right now, Michelle, that I'd love to share from a conversation I had yesterday talking to somebody about this research. We talked about mindset a little bit earlier. One of the things I think we have to think about is when our sellers are doing discovery, which requires both this critical questioning. Well, it requires a couple of different things that I think are very, very important. Number one, preparing with an understanding and a perspective and a point of view that you can question around about that customer's business. Number two, having the comfort and the capability to go deep, to ask the right level questions about the customer's business. Number three, to listen critically to what their responses are. All three of those things inherent in a good discovery strategy or a good questioning strategy require a healthy mindset on the part of the seller. What we're seeing today is a lot of sellers struggling with mindset. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of distraction. There's a lot that's clouding their minds around, am I going to be able to get to this more aggressive number this year when the economy is basically stagnant? Am I going to be able to understand all of these new solutions and these complexities that I need to present and sell? Am I going to be able to understand this complex buying group that I'm selling to? All of that can cloud the mind and put us in a more difficult mindset that makes it more difficult for us to open our mind and listen to what the customer is telling us. So as organizations are thinking about improving questioning, it is training, it's developing that capability, but it's also helping to improve and make more healthy the mindset of the sellers to be able to do it well.
Yes, 100%. I agree. And there is a concept in impact that we teach about focus. We talk about the focus curve. And if you're a client of ours and you're on this webinar, you will know what I'm talking about. And I think that goes somewhat hand in hand with the mindset, right? We need to be focused on the customer. And often we are focused on survival. Am I going to make my number this month? Am I going to keep my job, right? If I don't hit my number this month. And so depending on where we are in terms of our mindset and our focus, that's going to impact the quality of those conversations that sellers have with their customers. If it's the end of the month and they're not going to hit their number, they may be more product focused and pushing those like, just give me something that I can write a proposal that I can get in front of you that I may be able to close this deal, as opposed to really, as you're talking about, Spence, going deeper and listening and asking those next level questions, knowing that might prolong the conversation a little bit. All right, so the other skill that we looked at was on quantifying value. So much like the discovery and questioning skill, we asked a question, which statement best represents how most of your sellers quantify the value of your solution? And we gave them 4 options. Those 4 options could be, they focus solely on price. They talk about all the value components of our solution. They talk about how the value components of our solution address the customer's needs and challenges, or they show how the value components of our solution achieve ROI for the customer. And what we found is that our successful teams are 2 times as likely as underperforming teams to be able to connect value to ROI. So that ROI response, that was our most effective strategy. And so our successful teams are twice as likely to be able to do that.
And I think
43%.
this goes to taking that presentation, that that solution, to what does it ultimately do for the customer's business, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
and when we think, let's circle back to that critical need that organizations are saying they have to retain existing business. When you can substantiate, this is what this solution will ultimately do for your business, and then track that customer improvement over time, and then substantiate that improvement and follow-up conversation with them, that is a very strong strategy for retaining that business.
Yeah, absolutely. One more stat that I'll put out here in relation to this. 43% of our underperformers focused solely on presenting the price, so without any kind of communication or creation of value, and that was our least effective strategy. So again, an opportunity there for underperforming teams to really develop those skills in how they communicate and quantify the value of their solution. All right, so next key finding is on hiring and onboarding. So we, again, ask questions around how teams hire sellers, how they onboard them, and how they develop them. And our successful teams use hiring tools and resources for selection. And when we talk about tools and resources, we're talking about personality assessments, skill assessments, hiring profiles or job benchmarks, behavioral interview questions, reference checks. So those were the things that we specifically asked questions around. And 63% of organizations that consistently use assessments in the hiring process are confident in their ability to achieve their 2024 sales objectives. 56, so more than half, 56% of the successful organizations are using hiring profiles and job benchmarks. 65% of organizations that don't use assessments were below goal. And I would also encourage organizations not to ignore things like the type of interview questions that you're asking and those reference checks. So more than half of underperforming teams did not adhere to either of those best practices. So certainly being able to use tools that will help you screen and identify kind of the best fit candidates, and then validating that experience through good, effective interviewing skills and reference checks is critical. Our successful teams also offer structured hybrid onboarding. And again, that was the hybrid piece was a bit of a surprise for us. 87% of successful teams have extensive structured onboarding compared with their underperformers. And then 61% of those teams use hybrid onboarding versus 38% of underperforming teams. So again, it's that structured onboarding versus no really kind of formal onboarding process is very important. But what we're also seeing is the importance of kind of a blended approach to onboarding that maybe combines in-person and some virtual strategies as well.
Michelle, let me just make a quick comment on that I think is interesting. I think there are two pitfalls that organizations are falling into in onboarding new sellers today, and it relates to this idea of hybrid onboarding, which I like, and I think we need to be developing like we said, a clear, a structured approach to doing hybrid onboarding. I think on the one hand, we have this live fire hose onboarding that we do. Well, we're bringing everybody together live. We've got to get everything in their heads as much as possible. And true, a live interaction can have great episodic learning associated with it. Problem is when we just pour everything into people in a couple of days there and then send them away expecting them to execute, they start to stumble and it can be too much all at once. On the other hand is the Zoom slog of onboarding, which is join all of these different Zoom meetings in your office at home, listening to all of this information and try to retain it. And we know that's very difficult to do. So the organizations that are finding that balance of here's some information that we give you that we know needs to set a foundation that's important for you to understand and remember that we do in a live setting, then we reinforce that, allow for ongoing discussion and processing of that information in virtual opportunities, seem to be strengthening their people through an onboarding process much better.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it kind of follows best practices in training, just in general, right? So as we work with clients and engagements, we talk about training and then that reinforcement, and onboarding is really no different. One other little piece of data is that I will share with you all, and as you all know by now, I clearly like the data. What we did find a difference in onboarding ramp time for our successful teams versus our underperforming teams. So our successful teams or successful organizations were able to onboard a new seller to at least be able to engage with their customers, like face-to-face or virtually, just under 9 months. Our underperforming teams, it was just under 10 months. There was about a month's difference in getting their sellers up to speed and onboarding between our successful and underperforming teams. And then our successful teams use peer coaching and sales manager coaching to develop sellers. And this kind of goes back to the comment that Terry made earlier in our session. 58% of our successful teams cite manager coaching as a method for continuous training and development, compared to 44% of underperforming teams. And the teams that receive coaching from their sales managers are more engaged than their counterparts. So we really can't ignore the importance of your sales managers as coaches in developing your sellers. It is a critical component that our research showed. The other kind of, again, pleasantly surprising finding was around peer coaching. And our successful teams were more likely to use peer coaching with a team member as a development strategy. So
Michelle, let me just follow up on that comment really quickly, because this goes to some conversations we've been having in other webinars and some things we've been learning this year as well. If peer coaching is critically important in the fact that it gives everyone a development job to do. And if you want to get your people really engaged in the development enablement process, give them a job to do. And that peer coaching gives those individual contributor sellers a job to do in strengthening, developing someone else. And it keeps them much more engaged than if they just feel like they're solely a consumer of enablement and development.
I think that is an incredibly important point. I think even bigger picture, it is a great way to retain and engage those top performers, particularly if you don't have a promotion path that's available, is to leverage them as peer coaches, right? It's a great way to develop them and help them grow, even beyond just the context of a training or an enablement initiative. We have clients that are using peer coaching to help develop new sellers or sellers maybe that need to be upskilled in a particular area, right? So you have a seller maybe that's really strong in prospecting and one that's maybe not quite so strong, needs some help. Pair them together, and it's a win all the way around. So again, I really would encourage organizations, look at your sales managers and their coaching skills and their abilities, and leverage that peer coaching piece. All right, so our takeaways from today, and if you have questions for us, I know several of you have put them in the chat, but please feel free to enter them in the chat or the Q&A. But some key takeaways for you all to think about. Adhering consistently to a sales process. We talked about that, right? The importance of that adherence to your overall team performance and revenue goal attainment. Train on the skills that will give your team an advantage. So we talked about questioning and selling on value. Think about how well your team performs in those areas with those skills and where they may need development. Reinforce skills and process adherence through coaching and manager inspection. And that coaching can be peer coaching and sales manager coaching as well. And follow best practices in your hiring and onboarding processes. Again, really think about all of these things in relation to your team. These are kind of key takeaways and things where maybe you might need to implement or inspect within your own organization.
That was fantastic. There's more to learn about this, going deeper into those insights. Michelle, I'll let you share that really quickly.
Yes, so as we have mentioned, as we've been going along, our research is available, and each of you, just for registering for this webinar, will receive a copy. It is brand new, so you all are getting the first look at our research, much more than what was in our webinar today. We did talk about sales process adherence. We talked about impact. If you're interested in learning more about that, scan that QR code there on the screen as well.
Well, great. Well, look, I want to thank everyone for participating with us today. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing the great new research from the Sales Performance Research Center. We're excited about it. We're excited about this report. Hopefully you find it valuable in setting and strengthening your strategies for 2024 and helping your teams perform at a higher level. Just want to thank this audience for your participation, your answers to our polls, very insightful, all of the comments that came through. It's just so great to be with this group and this community as we kick off this year. We wish you all of the best and stand ready to support you in any way we can.
Yes, thank you all so much. Reach out and connect with us on LinkedIn if you're not already. Reach out to us here at the Brooks Group if we can answer questions or be of support in any way. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
All right.